If I had 5 minutes to live, I wouldn't want to be with any man. Really. I would be with my daughter. I would be with my closest friends. At this point in my life, I would not want to be with any one man. I've had very special men in my life. I wrote about them. I've been married more than once. Those words spoken late in life revealed something few people truly understood about Barbara Walters. She built an empire on drawing out other people's deepest truths, yet she spent decades guarding her own. Behind the poised voice and steady gaze was a woman shaped by secrecy, instability, ambition, and regret. Barbara Gill Walters was born on September 25, 1929, in Boston, just weeks after the stock market crash that plunged America into the Great Depression. Her father, Lew Walters, was a nightclub impresario who risked everything to build success. In 1937, he opened the Latin Quarter nightclub in Boston, and after paying every bill on opening night, he had only 63 cents left in his pocket. The gamble paid off. The club flourished. The Times Square Latin Quarter in New York became a glittering hotspot where stars like Frank Sinatra, Mae West, Milton Berle, and Mickey Rooney performed under dazzling lights. Barbara grew up surrounded by glamour. But at home, life was far more complicated. Her older sister, Jacqueline, born in 1926, lived with a developmental disability at a time when few understood such conditions. The family tried to mask the difference between the girls, but Barbara felt the strain. She avoided bringing friends home, afraid of their reactions, and carried both shame and guilt for feeling that way. Jacqueline remained dependent throughout. Her life and died of ovarian cancer in 1985. Barbara later said her sister defined her childhood, teaching her about responsibility and difference long before she understood either. When nightclub culture declined in the late 1950s, empire collapsed. The family's wealth evaporated, moved constantly, chasing opportunity from city to city. Barbara watched fortunes disappear overnight and understood early that she would need to support not just herself, but her parents and sister as well. That fear hardened in 1957 or 1958 when her father attempted suicide by swallowing sleeping pills. Her mother called Barbara before calling an ambulance. Lou survived, but from that night forward, Barbara felt the full weight of responsibility settle permanently on her shoulders. She titled her memoir, Auditioned, because she believed she had always been trying out for acceptance. She worried about her looks, her voice, her Boston accent. Yet those insecurities fueled her ambition. In 1961, after graduating from Sarah Lawrence College, she joined NBC's Today Show as a writer and researcher. Women were expected to remain in supportive roles while men handled politics and war. She wrote lighter pieces, waited patiently, and pushed quietly for airtime. By 1964, she was regularly appearing on Today. Though NBC labeled her the Today Girl instead of granting her full co-host status. When Frank McGee became host in 1971, he insisted on asking the first 3 questions in every serious interview before she could speak. She endured it. After his sudden death in 1974, she was finally named the program's first female co-host. Her interviewing style became her signature: soft, personal, direct. In 1972, she joined the small press corps traveling with President Nixon to China. One of only 3 women and the only female broadcaster on the trip. In 1976, ABC stunned the industry by offering her a 5-year contract worth $1 million per year to co-anchor the evening news. She became the first woman to reach that level of prominence and pay in broadcast journalism. The backlash was immediate. Critics mocked her salary and questioned her legitimacy. Her co-anchor treated her with visible hostility, she responded. By outworking everyone in the room, during the 1970s she began a secret relationship with Senator Edward Brooke, the first African American elected to the Senate by popular vote. He was married. She was separated. In that political climate, their interracial relationship could have destroyed both careers. They kept it hidden for decades. She did not reveal it publicly until 2008, calling him the love of her life. Her interviews became cultural landmarks. She sat with Fidel Castro in Cuba, pressed Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin together in Jerusalem, and drew massive ratings with her 1999 interview of Monica Lewinsky, watched by tens of millions. She later admitted she may have been too hard on Lewinsky, recognizing the young woman's vulnerability. Her personal life was far less controlled. She married 4 times, twice to the same man. She adopted her daughter Jacqueline in 1968 after suffering miscarriages. Determined to protect her privacy, she kept the adoption quiet and took no maternity leave. As her fame grew, her daughter struggled. By her early teens, Jacqueline was using drugs and running away. At 15, she disappeared for weeks after fleeing a program in Los Angeles. Barbara eventually sent her to a wilderness program in Idaho, a decision she later described as heartbreaking but necessary. The relationship never fully healed. Barbara would later say that no one on their deathbed wishes they had spent more time at the office. She wished she had spent more time with her daughter in 1997. At age 68, she launched The View, bringing together women of different backgrounds to debate politics and culture openly on daytime television. It became a lasting legacy. In 2014, when she retired from the show, dozens of female journalists appeared to honor her. Even longtime rival Diane Sawyer stood among them. Barbara looked at the women she had helped pave the way for and called them her legacy. Her final years were marked by decline. After open-heart surgery in 2010 and a series of health setbacks, dementia gradually erased the sharpness that had once defined her. She made her last television appearance in 2016 and withdrew from public life. Barbara Walters died on December 30th, 2022, at age 93. Her gravestone reads, "No regrets. I had a great life." Yet those close to her said that in quiet moments. Especially when looking at family photos, her expression suggested a more complicated truth. She conquered television. She shaped journalism. But in the end, a woman who asked the world its hardest questions carried a few of her own that never fully found peace. In her final years, visitors described a quieter apartment, the lights dimmer, the once constant ringing of telephones gone, silent. The woman who had once commanded presidents now sat in stillness, sometimes alert, sometimes distant. Dementia does not arrive like a storm. It slips in like fog. Names blur, dates loosen. Whole eras dissolve. For someone whose life had been built on memory and recalling facts, moments, expressions, it was a cruel undoing. Friends said there were flashes. A familiar face might spark recognition. A fragment of an old interview might flicker across her mind, but the continuity that had defined her brilliance was no longer there. The sharp follow-up question? The subtle shift in tone? The instinct to lean forward at exactly the right moment? Those gifts faded slowly, then almost completely. There is something haunting about that symmetry. A woman who spent her life helping others remember, asking them to revisit triumphs, scandals, heartbreaks, ultimately lost access to her own. She had once interviewed dictators and movie stars with the same calm intensity. She had pressed powerful men on war and policy. She had asked vulnerable young women about shame and survival. She had built rooms where secrets felt safe enough to be spoken aloud. And yet, in private, she guarded so much of herself. The fear of instability, the shame of childhood secrecy, the guilt of motherhood, the love she sacrificed, the rivalries that cut deep, the loneliness that followed achievement. For decades, she insisted she had no regrets. The phrase became part of her mythology. But regret is rarely loud. It lives in small admissions. In the way she asked friends about their grandchildren, in the quiet comment that she wished she had spent more time with Jackie. One said women can have it all, just not all at the same time. And then let the silence sit there. Her life was built on proving she belonged in rooms that were never designed for her. She fought condescension, isolation, and open hostility. She endured ridicule for her voice, her salary, her ambition. She outlasted critics. She changed what television looked like. When young female journalists stepped in front of cameras without having to justify their presence, they were standing on ground she had cleared. But success has a cost that doesn't show up on contracts. In the end, what remains is not only the ratings records or the historic interviews. It is the image of A young girl in a glittering nightclub, watching performers from the shadows, learning that applause can disappear overnight. It is the daughter who felt responsible for everyone before she understood what that meant. It is the mother who loved fiercely but imperfectly. It is the woman who kept auditioning long after she had already won the part, when she died at 93. Headlines celebrated a legend. Tributes poured in from politicians, actors, and journalists who credited her for opening doors. The public remembered the composure, the questions, the ratings milestones. Those who knew her remembered something else too, the relentless drive that came from fear of losing everything, and the tenderness she rarely showed in public. If she had 5 minutes left, she once said she would not choose a man. Choose her daughter. She would choose her closest friends. That may be the truest answer she ever gave. And maybe that is where the real story settles, not in the studio lights, not in the $1 million contracts, not in the historic interviews that reshaped television, but in that simple answer, about 5 minutes. For all her discipline. Was deeply emotional. She cried easily. Colleagues used to tease her about it. Comedians built entire monologues around her tears. Yet what they often missed was this. The tears were not weakness. They were recognition. She understood what it cost people to speak honestly. She understood what it cost her. She had spent a lifetime extracting confession from others, asking politicians about failure, actors about loneliness, public figures about betrayal. She knew how to sit in silence long enough for truth to surface. What she did less often was sit in her own. There is a pattern that runs quietly through her life. As a child, she learned that security could vanish overnight. As a young woman, she learned that love could threaten survival. As a journalist, she learned that success required armor. As a mother, she learned that ambition leaves shadows. Every phase demanded a trade. When she chose ABC and the record-breaking salary, she gained history and lost ease. When she protected her secret relationship, she preserved her career and lost the freedom to claim love publicly. When she launched The View and created space for women to debate loudly on television, she cemented her legacy but spent even more years away from home. When she sent her daughter to wilderness treatment, she may have saved her life, but fractured something fragile between them. None of these choices were simple. None were made lightly. But they stacked on top of each other, year after year. In retirement, without the daily rhythm of television, there was more space. Space can be dangerous. Without scripts, bookings, or deadlines, reflection grows louder. Friends said she would sometimes replay old interviews, not to admire them, but to revisit them, to remember the energy, the control, the clarity it is. Difficult for someone who has always been in motion to sit still. And then, as dementia progressed, even reflection became unreachable. The mind that once stored thousands of facts, faces, and fragments of dialogue began to empty. It is one of life's cruel ironies that a woman who documented so much history could not hold on to her own. Yet perhaps legacy is not measured by memory alone. It lives in structure, in precedent. The fact that a woman reading the evening news is no longer a novelty, the expectation that female journalists will ask hard political questions without apology. In the existence of roundtable debates led by women with strong, conflicting opinions, in the normalization of emotional intelligence as journalistic strength, those shifts did not happen by accident. Barbara Walters forced them into place. When she stepped down for the final time and looked out at the dozens of women who had followed her into the field, she understood something profound. Legacy is not applause. It is continuation, and still beyond all of that. There remains a quieter image, an elderly woman in a Manhattan apartment, photographs nearby, a daughter whose path was never easy, a life that was extraordinary and imperfect at the same time. Her gravestone says, "No regrets. I had a great life." Maybe that sentence is not denial. Maybe it is acceptance. You can acknowledge longing and still call your life great. You can wish you had balanced things differently and still be proud of what you've built. Human beings are capable of holding both triumph and tenderness at once. Barbara Walters lived inside that contradiction. She was fearless in public and uncertain in private. She broke barriers while carrying insecurities from childhood. I loved deeply but protected herself fiercely. She interviewed the world and spent much of her life auditioning for it. In the end, perhaps the clearest truth about her is this: she did not become powerful because she was unafraid. She became powerful because she was afraid of losing everything and refused to let that happen again. And that fear, channeled into discipline, reshaped American television forever. If you step back far enough, her life almost reads like one long negotiation between vulnerability and control, love and ambition, truth and silence. She learned early that image could protect you. In the nightclub world of her father, perception was everything. Lights, costumes, applause. The show looked successful. It was successful. At home, the same rule quietly applied. You did not expose weakness. You did not discuss instability. You did not invite the world into your chaos. Barbara absorbed that lesson so completely that even when she built a career on exposing truth, she still filtered her own. And yet, there were cracks where honesty slipped through. When she admitted she had been too hard on Monica Lewinsky. When she acknowledged that sending her daughter away broke her heart. When she said plainly that women can have it all, just not at the same time. Those were not rehearsed lines, were earned realizations. It is easy to mythologize pioneers. As fearless, the truth is usually more complicated. Barbara Walters was often anxious. She overprepared. She memorized. She studied faces, gestures, breathing patterns. She anticipated resistance before it arrived. The armor people mistook for confidence was often careful construction. But that construction mattered. In newsrooms that dismissed her, she did not retreat. In interviews where powerful men tried to charm or intimidate her, she did not flinch. When critics mocked her voice or her salary, she did not disappear. She absorbed it and continued. And in doing so, she shifted expectations permanently. What is most striking about her story is not just that she reached the top. It is that she reached it without reshaping herself into something colder. She asked emotional questions. She allowed pauses. She leaned into humanity at a time when journalism often valued distance over connection. She made empathy part of the craft. That choice influenced generations. But empathy can be exhausting. To sit across from trauma, scandal, confession, and grief year after year requires emotional stamina. Perhaps that is part of why, in private, she guarded her energy so tightly. Perhaps that is why relationships sometimes struggled under the weight of her focus. When your professional life demands that much presence, something else inevitably receives less. In the final chapter of her life, stripped of spotlight and competition, what remained were the essentials: family, memory, identity, even as dementia blurred her awareness. The impact of her work did not blur in the world she left behind. Young journalists still study her interviews. Media historians still cite her contracts as turning points. Television panels filled with outspoken women still trace their structure back to her original vision. And somewhere within that legacy lives the girl who once feared everything could collapse overnight. She proved to herself that it wouldn't, not on her watch. Perhaps that is the most human part of her story. She did not chase fame purely for glory. She chased stability. She chased independence. She chased a life where no one could pull the rug out from under her family again. In achieving that, she overcorrected. She built something so solid professionally that the emotional spaces around it sometimes went undernourished. That is not failure. It is complexity. Barbara Walters was not a saint. She was not flawless. She could be competitive, demanding, and relentless. But she was also trailblazing, perceptive, and brave in ways that changed an industry. Her life was not a clean arc. It was layered, glittering, and heavy, celebrated and lonely, historic and deeply personal. And in the end, when everything else fell away, titles, ratings, rivalries, what remained was a simple truth she had voiced herself. If time were short, she would choose her daughter and her closest friends. For someone who spent decades interviewing the world, That final answer may have been the most revealing. Of all, in the end, what lingers most is not the spectacle of her success, but the tension she carried between performance and reality. Barbara Walters understood performance better than most. She grew up backstage watching grown men transform into larger-than-life figures under hot lights. She saw how applause could disguise fear, how glamour could mask debt, how confidence could be rehearsed. It shaped her instincts. On television, she was measured, precise, prepared. She knew where to look, when to pause, how to let silence stretch. Just long enough to invite revelation. But behind that composure was someone who never fully stopped bracing for collapse. Even at the height of her fame, there was always another mountain to climb, another contract to negotiate, another critic to silence. She rarely allowed herself to coast. Success was not something to enjoy. It was something to defend. That mindset built an empire, but it also kept her in constant motion. The irony is that the very qualities that made her extraordinary, discipline, ambition, vigilance, were the same qualities that complicated intimacy. You cannot always turn off the part of you that is evaluating, anticipating, preparing. In interviews, that instinct was genius. In relationships, it could create distance. She once said she did not think she was good at marriage. That admission was not bitter. Matter of fact. She knew she demanded a great deal from herself and from others. She knew she prioritized work. She knew that when forced to choose, she almost always chose the studio, and yet she loved deeply. Her friendships were loyal and long-lasting. She mentored younger journalists quietly. She checked in on people long after interviews aired. Of sellers
Whoa.
who were inside her circle saw warmth that the public rarely did.